Now, on to Elias Pettersson, who was the one Canuck to detail an injury yesterday. He talked about a knee injury that he got in January and that the pain increased. Rick Tocchet called it tendinitis. More on Tocchet's comments about the injury, but there was a very interesting answer from Alvin on Elias Pettersson. And I want to play that now, and then we will come back. And a lot of it has to do with his second half and the new contract. J-Pat asked the question. We'll come back and we'll unpack this answer as well. Here's Alvin on Pettersson.
I don't know what he said when he was sitting up here, but I'm sure he wasn't pleased with his performance after the All-Star break, and I think he learned a lot. I think he's hungry. He expressed it right away that he knows what he needs to improve on here in the summer, and he wants to come back and be a really, really impactful player. His talent level is unique. I mean, that doesn't go away. Again, I think this was his first playoff experience, playing every second day with traveling. And when you're being a player like him and Quinn Hughes, they all going to play harder against you. So what do you learn, and how do you prepare yourself leading up for the second half? And I think, to be honest, some of the additions we did last summer was to bring in guys with that experience that can help us, teaching the young guys what practice habits are the first part. And I think we got to get better. I think our guys knows that you prepare yourself the early part of the season for what's coming the second part. And I think that's something that coaches we have here, they have the experience. It's about willingness to be coached and listen and execute.
That last line, Blake, it's about a willingness to be coached and listen and execute.
Feels like he's talking to somebody.
Well, particularly because he went on Canuck Central later in the day and said, with regards to Elias's injury, I think it was something you work through. I think the medical staff did a tremendous job of getting players ready to perform. I think that's part of learning on how to prepare yourself. Now, Tocchet was very wise. He wasn't going to sewer his relationship. He's too smart a communicator to sewer his relationship with a player of Elias Pettersson's stature by getting into a he said business on the injury. You may remember on May 8th, Tocchet said, look, went out of his way, as Patrick Johnson chronicled in the province, unprompted. There was a dissertation from the podium about Elias is not injured. He's just sick. We don't lie about that stuff around here.
Yeah.
So I think he was wise to basically align with Pettersson, say, yeah, it was tendinitis. I also think that Rick Tocchet, who gets up and eats a rusty can of nails for breakfast, probably has a different definition of injury than Elias Pettersson.
By the way, rusty can of nails is way better than a can of rusty nails, because at that point you're just talking about the plate that's served in, right?
Mm-hmm. Did I screw that up?
Yeah, a little bit. It's okay.
Did you get the gist?
I got the gist of it.
Though?
I still don't want nails.
Right.
I got it.
I hear you. There were many times during the course of the season where Tocchet talked about, some days you're not going to feel great. You got to push through. In fact, there was one point in the season where Tocchet talked about he didn't like it when Pettersson missed practice or players missed practice to rest. Not huge on those maintenance days when he thinks there's a lot of work can get done there on the practice ice. How many times this year we got to practice? We got to get things right in practice. Now, look. I think there's a process for Elias. I think it was a pretty rude awakening for Elias in terms of what the playoffs are like, what Alvin just outlined with every second day and travel and, seasoned teams like Edmonton and how hard they're going to play against your top players. So I am hopeful that Elias learns from this and becomes a better player next postseason. I also think he has been challenged here by the organization and somewhat in a public manner.
Well, I think the fans and the media have challenged him too, because I
don't think they're standing for any kind of sensitivity or preciousness or aloofness or passive aggressiveness. I think that's wearing pretty thin. It certainly wore thin with Canucks fans as he went through a difficult postseason, and I would not be at all surprised if it wore thin internally as well.
I don't think it's lost on Elias Pettersson that after a season in which almost everything went right for every other part of the team through the regular season, and the 2 rounds of the playoffs, pretty good considering where this team was coming from. I don't think it's lost on Elias Pettersson that almost every other player on the team is being feted except for him. That the guys that seemed to get the criticism while he was the savior. Remember, for years, Elias Pettersson,
right,
he was the knight in shining armor.
Right.
While people were upset about the attitude of JT Miller and Quinn Hughes was small and he looked sad. And,
and Blake, I think he's sensitive. Like I heard from the jump, like he did not like hard coaching. Like when Travis would get into him, he would recoil.
But everybody else is getting applauded now for what they did, and it's not him. Yeah. And I think he wants to be in that winner's circle, if you will. And I mean, if you don't see it next year, well, my goodness.
And look, his parting comment about, he's looking forward to the summer because, it'd be good to get away from hearing how shit he's been. There's a paraphrase there, but the joke stands, or if it was a joke. And you juxtapose that with Alvin telling players, hey, suck on this. Use this as fuel and motivation. Once again, there's a disconnect there. I know Patrick said he didn't hear what Elias had to say, but I think they're trying to root that out of the player. Like, enough of this woe is me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like, we're not doing the self-pity thing here. We're doing the push through, be the best professional that you can, and that includes having to play through pain. Farhan says he characterized a quad injury. Farhan Lalji on TSN. And I followed up with Farhan. I said, are you telling me there's 2 injuries? And he said, no, he wasn't sure. He thought maybe Elias was calling it a knee injury, but it's more like a quad injury. Look, whatever the case, you got to take your player at their word. And you've got to also put the measures in step to make sure that the injury gets better. A lot of people are wondering about whether they could have rested Elias Pettersson. Now, it's hard to know without knowing the degree of pain, the degree of tendonitis that's there. I would suspect that they looked at it and said, look, he needs X amount of weeks or days rest, and we just can't afford to give that to him here in the regular season. Needless to say, not in the playoffs as well. So this is just going to have to be an off-season matter.
But with
others are saying, no, you had some cushion there. You might have been able to find Elias more rest.
Like, that's patently just wrong. Like,
I don't know.
You had a multi-point lead. Honestly, they had an upwards of 16-point lead in the second half of the season on the Edmonton Oilers.
No, but the Edmonton Oilers were charging hard, though, Blake.
Late only.
Yeah, but if you rest them and you lose a bunch of games, guess what? You've just given the Oilers the division and
they ended up losing those games anyway.
No, but you don't know that, Blake. Come on.
But still, you've got a 16-point lead on the team below you, and your star player is nursing an injury that will not go away unless you rest it. Like, that's the prime opportunity to rest them.
No, come on. Organizations, coaches, they don't think like that.
The good ones do, Matt.
No.
Yes, they do. We see it all the time. I don't know what you're talking about. When you're going to
play with fire of falling out of first place and falling out of home ice.
How is that playing with fire?
Because if you're sitting your best player or one of your best players, you are less likely to win.
You have a double-digit point lead,
but it didn't turn out to be a double-digit point lead.
But that was
Edmonton was charging hard right at the end of the season.
But that was at the end.
You're not going to sacrifice your station to get the player some rest.
Matt, if we've established that the injury could be played through, that the player can play, that they can make him ready, then ergo he could be dropped back into the lineup at any second. It isn't a question of, if we take him out, he's got to sit for 5 weeks. If you sit him for a week and you go 1-2, not the end of the world. You sit him for a second week, you go 2-1, not the end of the world. You sit him for a third week, you go 0-3. Elias, time to go back. You've got control. You have agency. Yeah. You're not committed to him sitting a month. It's a day-by-day thing, and you get away with it as long as you get away with it. So Like if you don't have the opportunity there, God, when the hell do you? Get a 16-point lead on second place.
Which turned into what? 3 points in the last week? At one point, were the Oilers not a point back of them?
But if you had sat him when it was flaring up the most in February, he would have been back by that point anyway. And he probably would have been a more impactful player, and maybe it doesn't get down to 3 points anymore.
Yeah, and I would say a couple of things to that. Number one, perhaps the medical staff went to them and said, this is going to be a month, 6 weeks of rest before he's fully right. You don't have a month to 6 weeks. Secondly, and we just heard from Alvin, preparing yourself to play those hard games through the second half of the playoffs. So let's say you rest him and you drop him back in the playoffs, and now he gets another knock. Well, guess what? You have to play through it now. So at some point, you're going to have to learn to play through this. They asked him to play. If Elias didn't think he could play through it, Elias would have taken himself out, I'm quite sure.
I'm not quite sure.
There's too much pain here. I just can't play. They would say, okay, we'll sit you down.
See, I think the way that conversation goes is, I'm in a lot of pain. Okay, they do all the tests, they can do all the thing,
and they say it's tendonitis,
and they say there's not really anything there. There's not really anything there, and so the player doesn't feel like he can say, I can't play tonight, because there's actually not an injury to speak of.
Okay, agree to disagree on this one. Hey, everybody! If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.